My name is Tommaso Vinci, and on the night the schedule broke I was carrying a crate of returnable bottles up the service ramp of Sector 9, which is what we called the gutted basilica the reclaimers had repurposed into a sorting house. The bottles were not bottles. They had not been bottles for a long time. We called them that because the old word still fit the shape, and because the new word, the one the reclaimers used in their soft, chiming tongue, did not want to live in a human mouth. Each one was a sealed cylinder of gray alloy about the size of a wine jug, and inside each one was somebody who had been alive that morning. The reclaimers stamped a number on the lid. They scanned the number at the gate. They credited the courier his hour of rations. That was the work. I had been doing the work for 11 years. I was 43 then, in the second winter after the second cull, and my back had begun to argue with me on the long ramps. The dome above New Roma was the color of old milk that night, lit from inside by the slow drift of the harvesting platforms. You could see them moving if you stood still long enough. You learned, after a while, not to stand still long enough. My partner on the run was a kid named Pietro, 18, the son of a baker who used to make the flat bread with rosemary on top, before the ovens were requisitioned for something the reclaimers needed heated to a temperature that turned stone into glass. Pietro had his father's hands and his mother's silence. He pushed the cart and I walked beside it with the manifest, and every 20 paces one of the inspectors would chime at us from a doorway, and we would stop and bow our heads the regulation 40 degrees and wait until the chime stopped. The inspectors were the small ones, the size of a dog, and they walked on 6 segmented legs, and their backs were mirrored so that when you bowed you saw yourself bowing. That was deliberate. The reclaimers built their tools to teach lessons. They were patient teachers, and they had a great deal of time. That night the manifest had 72 cylinders on it, 72 numbers. I knew 4 of them. You learn not to read the names that came with the numbers, and after a while you learn not to ask which name went with which number, but sometimes you knew anyway. A woman from my building, a man I had played cards with in the cistern, a girl who used to sell stolen apricots near the dry fountain. And the 4th, the one I kept folding the manifest over so my thumb would not have to touch it, was my brother Lorenzo, who had been picked up 9 days earlier for failure to attend a scheduled processing. Lorenzo had not failed to attend. Lorenzo had been hiding a child in a wall. The child belonged to a woman whose husband had been recycled the previous month, and the woman had not yet found the strength to give the child up to the nursery, which was what the reclaimers called the place where the unscheduled small ones went. Lorenz had built a hollow in the back of a pantry behind a false brick, and he had been carrying milk down to the hollow for a year. The inspectors had come for an unrelated reason. They had heard the child cough. They had taken Lorenzo and they had not taken the child, because the child belonged to a different sector's manifest, and the reclaimers were nothing if not respectful of jurisdiction. They had filed paperwork and gone home, and someone else's inspectors would come for the child in 3 days, which was the standard interval for cross-sector transfers. That was the world. That was the floor we walked on. You carried the bottle of your brother up the ramp, and you handed it across the counter, and you held your palm flat for the ration token, and you did not weep, because weeping was a sign of unstable cognition, and unstable cognition was on the next manifest. I had not wept in 11 years. I want that on the record, not because I am proud of it, because it is the kind of detail a man should be honest about. Pietro pushed the cart and I walked beside it, and we came to the long bend where the old aqueduct used to feed into the cattle market, back when there were cattle and a market, and at the bend there was a man sitting on an upturned crate. He was old, older than me by a generation. He had a face like a dry riverbed, and he was holding, of all things, a small accordion. He was not playing it. He had it open across his knees as if it were a sleeping cat. He looked at me as we passed. He nodded the small nod that men of his age used to give each other in the city before the city was the city we have now. I nodded back. 40 degrees, the inspectors had taught us. He nodded 10. That was the first thing that was wrong that night, and I felt it in my stomach before my head named it. An old man with an accordion was a man who had something to celebrate, and there was nothing to celebrate in New Roma in the second winter after the second cull. I kept walking. I logged the wrongness and walked on, because in 11 years I had learned that wrongness was sometimes a trap and sometimes a tide, and you did not know which until the water was at your knees. We delivered the 72. The clerk at the counter was a human, a thin woman named Bice with a scar down the side of her face from the bad year. She scanned the cylinders one by one and stacked them on the conveyor, and the conveyor took them away into the heat of the basilica, where the reclaimers did whatever they did with the resource. We never saw past the inner door. The inner door was a sheet of the mirrored alloy, and when you stood close to it, you saw your own face and your own hands and the cart, and behind you the long line of other couriers waiting, and the whole thing looked like a painting of patience by an artist who hated us. Bice handed me the ration token. Her thumb pressed mine for a half-second longer than the transaction required. I looked up. She did not look at me. She looked at the next courier and called him forward, and her hand fell back to the scanner. But the pressure of her thumb stayed on mine all the way back down the ramp, and Pietro saw my face and did not ask. Outside in the plaza, the old man with the accordion was gone. The crate he had been sitting on was still there. On top of the crate was a folded square of paper. I did not stop to pick it up. You did not stop to pick things up in the plaza. You walked past, and if the thing was meant for you, you sent someone back later, and if the thing was not meant for you, you did not get involved. I walked past. I walked all the way to the corner. Then I stopped and I sent Pietro back, because Pietro was 18, and the inspectors did not yet weigh him the way they weighed me. He came back with the paper folded inside his palm. We did not open it in the plaza. We carried it down the long stair to the cistern, which was where the couriers ate at the end of a shift, and we sat against the wet wall and I unfolded it under the lamp. It was a schedule, not a reclaimer schedule with their soft chiming script that scrolled across the air. A human schedule hand-drawn in the kind of pencil only the old printmakers still had. 20 entries, times, locations. The first entry was set for that night at the third bell after dark at the cistern where I was sitting. The last entry was set for dawn the following morning at the gates of Sector 9. In the margin someone had written, in a hand I did not know, 4 words. The cavalry is coming. I read it 3 times. I folded it. I put it inside my shirt against my skin. Pietro watched me and did not ask. I said to Pietro, "You go home tonight. You do not come to the cistern at the third bell. You do not know me until tomorrow." He looked at me and his face did the thing it did when his father had still been alive, the small set of the jaw, and he said, "I will be at the cistern at the third bell." I told him no. He said yes. I did not have the strength to fight him on it. I am not proud of that either. The third bell came. The cistern at the third bell was a different place than the cistern at the end of a shift. The lamps had been moved. Someone had hung old curtains across the entry stair, the kind made from draped cloth too heavy for the reclaimer's scanners to read through. Inside the curtain space there were already 9 people sitting on the dry side of the cistern floor. I recognized 2. The old man with the accordion was one. He was not holding the accordion now. He was holding a list. The other was Bice from the sorting house, and her scar looked deeper in the lamplight. And she nodded at me when I came down the stair the way she had nodded at me 11 years ago when I had first stepped into the courier line, and she had taught me to keep my hands flat for the token. The old man stood up. He did not introduce himself. He said, "We have until dawn," he said. The harvest cycle for this sector runs from third bell to first bell of the following day. He said, "In that window, the inspectors rotate through the eastern districts, and the sorting house operates on internal scan only." He said, "If we do what I am about to tell you, the schedule breaks." He said, "If the schedule breaks, the reclaimers will be 12 hours behind on a process they have run on time for 19 years, and 12 hours is enough for the second cell across the river to do what the second cell across the river plans to do." He did not say what that was. We did not ask. He sat down. He passed the list. I looked at the list. My brother Lorenzo's number was on it, third from the top. Lorenzo was not dead. The cylinders did not kill you immediately. The cylinders held you in a state the reclaimers called preservation, and we called the long sleep, and the long sleep ended in the inner room of the sorting house when the conveyor reached the end of its line. Lorenz had 9 days in the cylinder. The standard interval from collection to processing was 14. The cavalry, whoever they were, had timed this for a reason. The list was the names of the cylinders we were going to walk back out of the sorting house before the conveyor reached them. I sat there with the list in my hand, and I felt the years come up the back of my throat. 11 years of bowing 40 degrees. 11 years of the mirrored backs of the inspectors showing me my own bent neck. 11 years of carrying my neighbors up the ramp on a cart and walking back down with a ration token in my palm and a thumb pressed too long against mine. And now there was a list, and the list had my brother on it, and the old man with the accordion was telling me that the schedule could break. I said, "What is my part?" The old man looked at me. He said, "You are the courier with the longest service record in this sector. You walk past the inner door 6 times a night. They scan you and they do not see you." He said, "We need someone to walk past the inner door one more time tonight with one thing under his coat and not be scanned and not be seen." He said the thing he needed me to carry was a small object the size of a child's fist, and inside the small object was a piece of the reclaimer's own scanning hardware, taken 3 months ago from a downed inspector by a man who is now also a cylinder on the list. He said the small object, when placed against the inner door, would convince the door for 9 minutes that it had not been opened. He said 9 minutes was enough for 2 people to walk the conveyor backwards. He said the 2 people were Bice, and a man I would meet at the 8th bell at the rear hatch of the basilica. I said, "Where do you need me?" He said, "You walk the front. You make the 6 runs. The 6th run you carry the object. You pass the inner door. You drop the object. You walk back out. You go home. You do not look back. You do not stay to see the rest." I said, "My brother." He said, "Your brother walks out the back hatch at the 9th bell with the others if everything works. You see him in 3 days at a place I will tell you tomorrow." He said, "If you stay at the basilica to see him come out, you ruin everything because a courier who lingers after his last run is a courier the inspectors check twice." He said, "Do you understand?" I said I understood. I did not understand all of it. I understood enough. We sat in the cistern for another hour, and the old man went through the parts that were not mine. The man at the rear hatch was named Carlo, and Carlo had been a locksmith. Bice would carry the names. There were others, 3 I had not seen yet, who would handle the eastern rotation, which is to say they would make the inspectors believe the eastern rotation was happening on time, when in fact the eastern rotation would be missing 2 of its waypoints. There was a man on the dome, on the outer dome, with a device that would interfere with the chiming relay for exactly 4 minutes between the 7th and 8th bells. There was a woman in the nursery, the place where the unscheduled small ones went, and her part I did not ask about because the old man's face changed when he came to it, and I am old enough now to know when a man's face is asking you not to ask. At the end, the old man looked at each of us in turn. He said, "We have done this kind of work before." He said, "We have not done it at this scale before." He said, "Some of us will not be at the next meeting." He said this as a fact, the way a man tells you the price of bread. Then he picked up the accordion. He did not play it. He held it the way he had held it on the crate, open across his knees, and we sat for a moment in the cistern and listened to nothing. And the lamps moved with the breath of the people in the room, and I thought about my brother in the cylinder, and I thought about the child still hidden in the wall of Lorenzo's pantry, and I thought about whether I had any weeping left in me after 11 years, and I decided that I did not, and I decided that this was the night I would find out for sure. I went home, I slept 2 hours, I woke at the 4th bell. The dome was the color of bone. The first run that morning was light, 12 cylinders. I logged them and I carried them. The inspectors chimed at me 3 times and I bowed 3 times 40 degrees and I saw my face in their backs 3 times and I walked on. Bice scanned the cylinders. Her thumb did not press mine. The transaction was clean. We did not look at each other beyond the regulation glance. The second run was 20 cylinders. The third was 15. The fourth was 11. By the fifth run the sun, what we still called the sun even though it came through the dome filtered to the color of weak tea, was at the high point of its short arc and the plaza was at its most crowded, and I pushed the cart through the crowd with Pietro on the handle and the manifest in my hand. And at the corner near the dry fountain, the old man with the accordion was sitting on his crate again, and this time he was playing it. He was playing a song my grandfather used to play, a song from the part of the country we had come from before the cities collapsed into the dome, and the song was not loud, and it was not happy, but it was the kind of song that a man plays to mark a thing. Nobody else in the plaza recognized the song. The inspectors did not register it as music because their definition of music required a certain ratio of harmonic intervals which the song failed in the second bar. The inspectors heard it as noise. I heard it as a signal. I delivered the fifth run. Bice scanned. Her thumb pressed mine, twice this time. The second press was longer. That was the confirmation. The man on the dome had checked in. The woman in the nursery had checked in. Carlo was in position at the rear hatch. The sixth run, the one with the object, was on. I walked back down the ramp with Pietro and we picked up the sixth manifest at the staging yard, 22 cylinders. The yard clerk was a reclaimer, not a human. The reclaimers handled their own manifests at the staging end. He was tall, this one, taller than the standard 9 feet, and the segments of his body had the long banded look of an older worker, one of the originals from the first occupation. His mirrored chest plate caught the light wrong, the way old mirrors do. He did not look at me. He chimed the manifest into my reader, and I bowed 40 degrees and Pietro bowed 40 degrees, and we took the cart. The object was already on the cart. Bice had put it there during the fifth run, tucked between 2 cylinders, wrapped in the cloth that we used to pad the lids. I felt for it as I walked. It was warm, warmer than it should have been. I did not know what that meant. I assumed it meant the device was working, or starting to work, or about to work. I did not know enough about reclaimer scanning hardware to know if the warmth was a good sign or a sign that something was already going wrong. I kept walking. We were halfway up the ramp when the first thing went wrong. An inspector came down the ramp from the upper gate, not one of the ones from the regular rotation, a larger one the size of a calf with the banded chest of a senior. It was not on the schedule for that hour. It stopped in front of the cart. It chimed at us. We bowed. It did not stop chiming. It chimed for 9 seconds, then 10, then 15. The chime was the long chime, the one that meant inspection. Pietro's face went the color of the dome. I kept mine still. I said in the courier reclaimer pigeon that we had been taught, Courier 271, 6th run of shift, manifest 22 cylinders, ramp passage authorized. The inspector chimed back. It said, in its own tongue, manifest discrepancy. It said, cart weight exceeds manifest weight by 0.32 kilograms. The object weighed 0.32 kilograms. The inspector raised its left foreleg, which was the gesture they made before they called for a senior. I did not have time to think. I have thought about what I did next many times since, and I cannot tell you that I made a decision. I can tell you that my hand moved. I dropped the manifest. The manifest fell on the ramp. I bent to pick it up. As I bent, I knocked the cart with my shoulder hard on the up-ramp side, and the cart tilted, and 3 of the cylinders rolled off the side of the cart and went over the edge of the ramp and fell. The ramp at that point was 12 meters above the loading floor. The cylinders fell 12 meters and hit the concrete, and one of them split, and the contents of the cylinder came out onto the concrete in a pale gray wash, and the smell came up the ramp. And the inspector forgot about the manifest discrepancy, because a split cylinder was a Category 1 incident, and a Category 1 incident took priority over a Category 3 weight check. The inspector chimed for cleanup. 3 smaller inspectors came running. Pietro stared at me. I stared at the floor. I do not know whose cylinder I had dropped. I had not read the names. I have not read the names since. I do not want to know. I think that is cowardice. I think also that if I had known the name, I would not have been able to keep walking, and if I had not kept walking, my brother would have died in the long sleep, and the schedule would not have broken, and the second cell across the river would not have done whatever it was they planned to do. I tell myself these things. They do not weigh the same as the name I did not read. The inspector waved us on. Manifest discrepancy resolved by cylinder loss. The remaining 19 cylinders proceeded. We pushed the cart up the ramp, and the warmth of the object against the cloth burned the inside of my arm where I had pressed it during the bow, and we reached the top of the ramp, and we came to the inner door. The inner door was the mirrored sheet I had stood in front of 6,000 times. I saw my own face in it. I saw Pietro behind me. I saw the cart. I saw the cylinders. I saw the inspector behind the cart watching. I saw nothing in my own face. 11 years of practice. I reached into the cloth between the cylinders, and I took the object in my hand, and I leaned against the door as if to push it open, and I let the object rest against the mirrored alloy for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The warmth flared. The object softened the way wax softens when it is held against skin. Then it was cold. I pushed the door. The door opened. I pushed the cart through. The cart went onto the conveyor, and the conveyor took the 19 cylinders into the inner room, and I turned around, and I walked back through the door, and I closed it behind me, and the door closed on the second cold pulse of the object that was now stuck to its inner face. Nobody had seen the object. The inspector behind us had been watching the cart. Bice at the counter had been scanning the manifest. The mirrored alloy of the door had reflected its own surface back at every scanner in the room. I picked up my ration token. I walked down the ramp. I did not look back. Pietro walked beside me. He did not look back either. He had learned. He had learned in one night what had taken me 11 years. We walked out of Sector 9 and into the plaza, and the old man with the accordion was no longer at his crate. The crate was gone too. The plaza was the regular plaza, with the regular crowds, and the dome was the regular bone color, and nothing in the plaza knew that 9 minutes from then, a hidden device on the inner face of a door was going to convince a sorting house that it had not been opened. I should have gone home. The old man had told me to go home. He had said, "You do not stay to see the rest." I did not go home. I walked Pietro to his mother's door, and I left him there, and his mother came out, and she said nothing, and she took her son inside, and she closed the door, and I walked back across the plaza, and I went down into the cistern, and I waited. I waited because I had spent 11 years walking away from things, and I could not walk away from this one. I want that on the record too. I waited because I was a coward in one way and not in another, and the not in another way got the upper hand for 1 hour of my life. The 7th bell rang. From the cistern you could hear the bells through the stone. The 7th bell was the bell when the man on the outer dome would have begun his interference with the chiming relay. I sat on the dry side of the floor and I counted my breaths. The 7th bell ended. There was a pause. Then very faintly through the stone, I heard the chiming relay stop. The chime that had been the constant background of New Roma for 19 years, the slow, soft tone of the reclaimer network talking to itself, went quiet. It went quiet the way a room goes quiet when somebody you had not noticed leaves. You realize in the silence how much of you had been listening. I sat in the silence for 4 minutes. The 8th bell rang. The silence ended. The chime came back. I heard it through the stone the way I had heard it for 11 years, and now I noticed it, the way you notice a man's voice after he has cleared his throat. The interference window had closed. Whatever had needed to happen in those 4 minutes had happened. I climbed the stair out of the cistern. I crossed the plaza. I did not go to the front of the basilica. I went around the long way, past the dry fountain, past the boarded ovens that used to make the rosemary bread, past the wall where the child was still hidden behind the false brick, and I came to the alley behind the basilica that ran down to the rear hatch. The alley was narrow and the lamps were out. I stayed against the wall. At the rear hatch there was movement, not loud, not the kind of movement that called attention, the kind of movement that is the absence of stillness. I saw a man I did not know come out of the hatch carrying another man over his shoulder. The second man was wrapped in a courier's cloak. His face was not visible. I saw a second man come out carrying a woman. I saw a third. I counted 12, 15, 18, 20. The list had said 23. I waited for the last 3. The 21st came out. He was walking on his own, supported by Carlo the locksmith, and his head was down and his hair was matted with the gray wash of the cylinder fluid, and his hands were still half curled the way a man's hands curl after a long sleep in a tight space, and I knew the curl of those hands. I had known them since we were children. Lorenzo. I did not call out. The old man had said not to call out. I stood against the wall and I watched my brother be carried into the alley by a stranger, and I watched the stranger and my brother turn the corner at the far end of the alley and disappear into the warren of the lower district. And I did not move, because I had been told not to move, and because if I had moved I would have fallen. The 22nd came out. The 23rd did not. I waited. The rear hatch closed. The alley went still. 22 out of 23. I learned later that the 23rd had been a woman named Adriana, and that her cylinder had been one of the ones the reclaimers had moved up the line during the 5th bell, and that by the time Bice and Carlo reached the conveyor, she was already past the point where the long sleep could be reversed. They left her on the conveyor. They had no choice. Bice cried in the cistern the next night. The old man told me later, and she had cried for the first time in 7 years, and the old man had not stopped her, because some weeping has to be allowed to happen or the person doing it stops being a person. I walked home through the long way, past the wall with the child in it, and I did not stop at the wall because the child was not on my list that night. The woman in the nursery had been at the nursery. The child in the wall was for someone else's manifest in 3 days, and now there might not be a 3 days, and now there might not be a manifest. I walked home. I slept. I will tell you what happened over the next 12 hours, because that was the night the schedule broke, and I was not in the rooms where it broke. But the old man told me later, and Bice told me later, and Carlo told me later, and Pietro, who was 18 and who should have been at home with his mother, was in one of the rooms because Pietro had gone out again after I had left him, and Pietro had walked himself into the second cell across the river without being asked. And Pietro had been the one who stood at the relay tower on the South Bridge when the second cell did what they had planned to do, and Pietro was not at home, and Pietro was not at his mother's door when his mother opened it the next morning. And Pietro's mother did not weep, because the inspectors would have heard her, and Pietro's mother bowed 40 degrees to a door that was not there. What the second cell did across the river was this. The reclaimers ran their sector network on a hub system. There were 12 hubs in New Roma. Each hub coordinated the chiming, the manifests, the rotations, the cylinder processing, the nursery transfers, the ration tokens, the ramp lighting, the dome filtration, and the long sleep maintenance. The hubs talked to each other through the relay network, which was the constant soft chiming we had all stopped hearing because we had heard it for 19 years. The hubs were redundant. If one went down, the others picked up its load within 90 seconds. You could not kill a hub by killing it. You could only kill a hub by convincing the other 11 hubs that it was still alive and processing. The second cell had spent 4 years working out how to make a dead hub still chime. They had built a small machine. The machine was the size of a wine cask, and it had been made from parts stolen from the reclaimers' own facilities over 4 years, one piece at a time, by men and women who were now mostly cylinders on the list. The machine, when activated, broadcast the chiming pattern of a healthy hub on the frequency the relay network expected. It was not a copy. It was a recording, made over 6 months from a hub the cell had been close enough to monitor. The recording was 14 hours long. The reclaimers would not notice for 14 hours that the hub was repeating itself, because the chiming pattern of a hub had its own internal music, and you had to listen for 14 hours to hear the rhyme. The reclaimers had a great deal of time. They did not have 14 hours of patience for this. At the 8th bell, the cell brought the machine to the relay tower on the South Bridge. They activated it. They killed the actual hub, which was the hub coordinating Sector 9 and the 3 sectors east of it, by feeding it a manifest with a recursive error in the second line. The hub crashed. The machine took over the hub's broadcast. The other 11 hubs heard the chiming pattern of a healthy hub and went about their business. For 14 hours, the Reclaimers' map of New Roma had a hole in it where Sector 9 was, and the Reclaimers did not know the hole was there. In those 14 hours, the second cell did a great deal of work. They walked 73 children out of the nursery. They walked 411 cylinders out of the sorting house, with their lids broken, and the people inside woken in the cold rooms of an old wine cellar that had been prepared a year in advance for this purpose. They walked 109 of the human collaborators, the clerks and the inspectors of our own kind who had kept the schedule running, out of their offices and into the river, which is a thing I do not defend, but which I also do not condemn, because 11 years is a long time and there were names on the list of collaborators that I will not write down. They walked one reclaimer, a small one, a juvenile by their standards, out of its cradle in the sorting house and into a room where the old man with the accordion and 3 others spent 6 hours doing to it what we had learned, over 11 years, the Reclaimers did to us. I was not in that room. I am told the old man did not play the accordion in that room. I am told he sat in the corner and listened, and at the end he stood up and he asked the small Reclaimer a question in its own tongue, and the small Reclaimer answered, and the old man wrote the answer down, and the answer was the part of the Reclaimer biology that we had not understood for 19 years, which was this. The Reclaimers were not a species, they were a generation. They had come to our world together. They had been born together on a ship all at once, 200,000 of them decanted from a single hold and trained for one purpose, which was to process this world. When they had finished processing this world, they would be returned to their hold and they would sleep until they were needed for the next world. They did not reproduce. They did not age the way we age. They did not have parents. They did not have children. They had each other and they had the schedule and they had the hold. And when the hold called them home, they would go home, and they would sleep, and they would forget us, because the next world would have its own schedule. The small Reclaimer, the juvenile, was the last one. The hold had decanted them in batches over 19 years, and the small one was from the last batch, and the last batch had been small, because the Reclaimers had calculated that the processing of this world was nearly complete, and they had begun the wind down. The schedule we had been living under for 19 years was a schedule built to end. It had an end date. The end date was in 4 months. In 4 months, the hold was going to call its generation home. The cylinders that had been processed were going to be loaded onto the hold. The Reclaimers were going to climb back into their cradles. The hold was going to lift from the dome and go to the next world. And the next world would have a dome built on the bones of its own old city, and a courier on a ramp, and an old man on a crate with an accordion, and a child in a wall, and a schedule. The old man wrote the answer down. He took the answer to the second cell. The second cell took the answer to the third cell, which I had not known existed, which was on the outer dome itself, in the maintenance scaffolding that ran along the underside of the alloy plates. The third cell had been waiting for the answer for 4 years. They had known the Reclaimers were a generation. They had not known the end date. The end date told them how long they had to do the next thing. The next thing was the thing the cells could not do without the schedule breaking. The schedule had broken for 14 hours. The third cell used the 14 hours to climb the inner face of the dome and reach the cradle docks, where the Reclaimers slept their off-shift sleep. They could not kill the Reclaimers in the cradles. The cradles were armored. They could lock the cradles. They could weld the cradle hatches shut, with the alloy welders the Reclaimers themselves had brought to our world for cylinder sealing. The third cell welded 84 cradle hatches in 14 hours. 84 Reclaimers, when they came off shift, would find their cradles sealed, and they would have nowhere to sleep, and they would have to sleep where they stood, and they would not be able to sleep where they stood, because their biology required the cradle. It was a small number, 84 out of 200,000, but it was 84 more than the reclaimers had ever lost, and it was 84 crews of inspectors without their senior, and it was 84 wedge points in a schedule that had assumed no wedge points. The 14 hours ended. The recording on the broadcast machine finished its loop and the relay network heard the hub repeat itself. The hub that was dead was confirmed dead. The other 11 hubs began the 90-second redundancy protocol. They reached for the Sector 9 map. The map had a hole in it. The hole was full of things that did not match the schedule. Cylinders gone, cradles welded, hatches open, nurseries empty, a juvenile reclaimer in pieces in an old wine cellar. The reclaimers, the old man told me later, did not respond the way we had expected. We had expected fury. We had expected reprisal. We had expected the long call, the one we had been preparing for in our private prayers for 19 years. The reclaimers did not do any of that. The reclaimers, when their schedule broke, went still. They stood where they were standing. Inspectors in the streets stopped chiming. The harvesting platforms above the dome stopped drifting. The chiming relay went quiet, and this time it did not come back. For 3 hours, New Roma was the quietest city in the world. The old man said it was because they had not been built for surprise. He said their generation had been decanted from a hold that had processed 9 worlds before ours, and on every one of those worlds the schedule had run on time, and the schedule had ended on time, and the hold had called them home on time. He said our schedule was the first one that had broken in 9 worlds of processing. He said the reclaimers, standing in the streets, were doing the thing they did when their schedule no longer told them what to do. They were waiting for a new schedule. There was no new schedule. The schedule was a thing they did not know how to make. The schedule had been made for them in the hold before they were decanted, and they did not have the parts in them to write a new one. We had 3 hours. The cells used the 3 hours. I will not tell you everything we did. Some of it I do not know. Some of it I know and will not say. I will tell you what I did because I am the one writing this down, and a man can only honestly tell you about the corner of the room he was in. At the 3rd hour I was back in the basilica. I was not on a manifest. There was no manifest. There were no inspectors. The mirrored door was open and the conveyor was still. Bice was at the counter and she was not scanning. She was sitting on the counter with her legs swinging, the way a child sits, and her face was wet, and she did not care because there was no one to register unstable cognition, and she had earned the right to weep, and she was weeping. I walked past her and I went through the door. I had never been through the door. In 11 years of walking up to it and looking at my own face in it, I had never been through it. I went through it. The room behind it was a long room with rails on the floor, and the rails carried the conveyor, and the conveyor went the length of the room and ended at a door at the far end. And on the conveyor there were cylinders, and the cylinders were unlit, and the small lights on the lids were dark, and the long sleep inside them had ended, because the reclaimers had stood still for 3 hours and the processing had stopped halfway through. I walked the length of the conveyor. I looked at the numbers on the lids. I did not read the names. I was looking for the empty places. There were many empty places. The list had taken 22 cylinders out. The 411 the second cell had walked out had been from this room and the rooms beyond it. The room was not empty. There were still hundreds of cylinders. The reclaimers had been ahead of schedule, the old man said later. They had been processing faster than the wind down required, to be sure of finishing on time. The way an old workman finishes his last job a day early to be sure of his pension. I walked to the far end of the conveyor. The door at the far end was open. I went through it. Beyond it was the inner room, the one we had never seen past, and it was not what I had thought it would be. It was not a furnace. It was not a slaughterhouse. It was a library. The cylinders, when their long sleep ended, were emptied of their contents, and the contents were filed. The contents were a single small disc, the size of a coin, taken from the back of the skull, and the disc was filed in a wall of small drawers, and the wall of small drawers went up to a ceiling I could not see in the lamplight. The cylinders were taken from the conveyor and stacked on a shelf to be returned to the hold for the next world. The bodies, the part of us that was not the disc, the part of us we would have thought of as us, were processed in a way I will not describe because I saw it and I cannot unsee it, and you do not need to see it through my eyes. I will say only that the reclaimers did not waste any of us. They were not cruel. They were thrifty. They were a generation built for thrift. I stood in the library for a long time. I looked up at the wall of small drawers. I did not know which drawer my brother had been heading for. I did not know whose disc was in which drawer. I knew, looking at it, that there were 19 years of new Roma in that wall, and there were 9 other walls in 9 other libraries on the 9 other worlds the hold had processed before us, and the hold itself was a wall of walls, and the next world's wall was waiting empty for its drawers to be filled. I went back through the conveyor room. I went back through the mirrored door. I went out into the plaza. The reclaimers were still standing still. The dome above us was no longer the color of bone. It was the color of nothing because the filtration had stopped with the chiming, and the unfiltered light of our actual sun was coming through, and our actual sun, after 19 years, was a color I had forgotten existed. The plaza was full of people standing with their faces turned up to it. Bice came out of the basilica and stood next to me and put her hand in mine, not the way a woman puts her hand in a man's when there is anything between them, but the way one tired worker puts her hand in another tired worker's, and we stood with our faces turned up to the color I had forgotten. The 3 hours ended. The reclaimers moved. They did not move the way we had feared. They moved the way a man moves who has remembered after a long pause that he had been about to do a thing. They began, all of them, all over New Roma, all at once, to walk toward the cradle docks. They did not chime. They did not scan. They did not gather the cylinders. They did not pursue the cell members who were still in the streets. They walked. The inspectors followed. The harvesting platforms began to descend toward the cradle docks. The whole generation, 200,000 of them, was walking home. The old man, when I found him that evening in the cistern, said he had not expected this. He said the wind-down date had been 4 months out, and we had pushed it forward by some amount he could not calculate, and the reclaimers had decided in the 3 hours of stillness that the wind-down was effectively complete. He said they were leaving. He said they would be in the hold by the next bell. He said the hold would lift before dawn. We watched the hold lift before dawn. The hold was a thing we had never seen, because the hold had been on the outer dome the whole time, on the side facing away from the city. When it lifted, it came around the curve of the dome and it crossed the bone-colored sky and it climbed past the color I had forgotten, and we stood in the plaza, all of us, the whole sector, the whole city, and we watched it. It was the size of a mountain. It was the color of the reclaimers' mirrored backs, and as it climbed it caught the light of our actual sun, and for a moment every face in the plaza saw itself in the side of the hold, and then the hold turned, and the light bent, and the hold was gone. The dome cracked 12 hours later. It had been built for a process that was no longer running, and without the maintenance of the platforms it did not hold its own weight. The crack started at the north and ran the length of the city, and the plates began to peel back the way an old fruit peels. We had been warned by the third cell, the ones who had been on the inner scaffolding, that this would happen. We had 3 days, they said, to get the people out from under it. We got most of them out. We did not get all of them out. The plate that fell on the sorting house took Bice with it, who had refused to leave the counter until she had carried out every cylinder still on her shelf, and who had carried out all but 6, and who was carrying the 7th when the alloy came down. The old man with the accordion was outside the sorting house, and he saw it happen. He sat on his crate for an hour afterwards, and he did not play the accordion. Then he picked it up and he played the song from my grandfather's country, the long one, the one in 2 parts, and he played the second part this time, the one he had not played in the plaza on the day of the schedule, and people gathered around the crate and they listened. And when he was finished, he closed the accordion and he stood up and he said, We have a city to rebuild. I rebuilt the city. We all rebuilt the city. It took 14 years. I am 57 now and my back argues with me on the long ramps, but the ramps are ours now and the cart I push is my own and the manifest I carry is a manifest of bread, not of bottles. The child in the wall came out of the wall on the morning the dome cracked. She was 4 years old. She is 18 now. She lives 2 streets over from me and she is studying to be an engineer, because the city needs engineers and she has her father's hands, the father she does not remember, the man whose cylinder I might have carried up the ramp 11 years before she came out of the wall. She does not know this. I will not tell her. There are some kindnesses a man can give another person, and one of them is to not tell them which manifest their dead were on. My brother Lorenzo came back to himself slowly. The long sleep takes its time letting go of you. For the first year he could not be in a room with a closed door. For the second year he could not hold a cylinder of any kind, not a wine jug, not a flour tin, not a water canister. By the third year he could. He is a baker now in his father's old shop, which was our father's old shop, and the rosemary bread is back. He makes it on Sundays. He does not talk about the 9 days in the cylinder, and I do not ask, and we eat the bread together in the kitchen, and the door is open, and the windows are open, and the dome is gone, and the sky above us is the color of our actual sun, which I no longer have to remember, because I see it every day. The cylinder that fell off the cart on the ramp that night, the one I knocked off to save the run, the one whose name I never read. I have thought about that cylinder for 14 years. I have not gone to look at the list. The list still exists. The old man kept it in a tin under his bed, and when he died 4 years ago of old age and not of anything else, the tin came to me. The tin is on a shelf in my kitchen. I have not opened it. I know that the name of the person in the cylinder I dropped is in the tin. I know I could read it, and I know that if I read it the weight of the night the schedule broke would shift on my shoulders, and I do not know in which direction it would shift, and I am old enough now to be careful about what weights I move. The old man is buried in the courtyard of the basilica that used to be the sorting house. The basilica is a school now. The children of the city go to school there, and they pass the spot where the inner door used to be, and the door is gone, and the rails are gone, and the library at the far end was emptied and the discs were buried, all of them. In the long trench we dug the first spring, and there is a stone over the trench, and the stone does not have names on it because there are too many names, and instead the stone has the 4 words the old man wrote in the margin of the schedule that found me on the crate in the plaza. The cavalry is coming. He told me, the last time I saw him, sitting on his crate in the courtyard of the school, what the words had meant to him. He said, when he was a boy, before the dome, before the reclaimers, before any of it, his grandfather had told him a story about a town under siege, and a column of horsemen who were coming to relieve the siege, and the people in the town who held on through the last night because they knew the horsemen were on the road. He said his grandfather had told him the horsemen were never the point of the story. The point was the holding on. The cavalry, his grandfather had said, is whoever decides to be the cavalry. There is no column on the road. There is only the people in the town deciding, one by one, on a night when the schedule says they should die, that they will not die that night. I sat with him on the crate and I did not say anything. There was nothing to say. He played the accordion for a while. Then he stopped, and we watched the children come out of the school, and one of them was Lorenzo's daughter, who is named after our mother, and she came across the courtyard and she sat on the crate between us, and the old man taught her the first 3 notes of the song from my grandfather's country, and she got the second note wrong twice and the third note right on the first try, and the old man said she had her grandfather's ear, and she did not know which grandfather he meant, and I did not tell her. Because some kindnesses a man gives another person are the kindness of not nomming a thing. I am writing this down because the old man asked me to before he died, and because the city is rebuilding faster than it is remembering, and because in another 19 years there will be people in this city who do not believe that there was ever a dome, And there will be people who believe the schedule was a story we made up to feel important about ourselves. I am writing this so that, when those people ask, there is something on a shelf to hand them. I am not writing it for them to admire us. We were not admirable. We were tired, and we were small, and most of us bowed 40 degrees for 11 years, and the ones who did not bow were taken out of the manifest one at a time, and the rest of us walked past their empty places and carried the cart up the ramp, and we did the work, and the work was the betrayal of our neighbors, and we did it for a ration token that bought a loaf of bread that was not as good as the bread Lorenzo makes now. We were not admirable. We were a generation. They were a generation. The difference between their generation and ours was that ours could decide on one night to stop being on schedule. That was the whole difference. That was the only difference. The whole did not account for it because no hold ever has. We will not be admirable in the next 19 years either. There will be a new schedule made by us this time, and it will be a better schedule, but it will still be a schedule, and there will be a night in some city on some street when a courier with a cart will look at a folded square of paper on a crate, and he will decide whether to pick it up. I cannot tell him what to do. I would not tell him if I could. I will only say that if he picks it up, he should not look back when he walks away from the ramp, and he should not stay to see the rest, and he should let the cavalry be whoever the cavalry turns out to be, and he should not weep until the work is finished. And when the work is finished, he should weep, because the weeping is part of the work, and a man who does not weep at the end of it is a man who has left some of the work undone. That is what I have to tell you. That is the corner of the room I was in. The dome is gone. The sky is the color of our actual sun. The bread has rosemary on it. My brother is alive. The child came out of the wall. The old man's accordion is on a shelf in the school in a glass case with no plaque because he did not want a plaque. The tin is on my kitchen shelf. I have not opened it. I will not open it. When I die, somebody else will open it, and they will read the name, and they will know what to do with it. That is not my work. My work was the ramp and the door, and the cart that I knocked with my shoulder on a night when my hand moved before my head did, and the long walk down to the cistern at the third bell, and the holding on. We held on. That was all. We held on, and the schedule broke, and the hold went home, and the sky came back, and we put our hands in each other's hands, and we stood in the plaza with our faces turned up. That was the night. That was all of it. There is nothing more to tell.